We're down to the final week of play in OWCS EMEA here in Stage 4. One more week to go before we decide the 3 teams representing this region in the OWCS Finals in DreamHack Sweden at the beginning of November. It's a tight race, nobody's clinched their spot just yet, and there's multiple teams still in the running. Who punches their ticket this time around? Who clutches up and takes their opportunity at glory? Let's find out. And to get us there as we wait for Thursday, today I'm going to do a preview, breakdown, and my predictions of the stage and how I think it's ultimately going to go. And the first place to start with is the 8 participants that we're going to be looking at. Starting with Group A, we'd see ENCE and Vendetta advance, and Vendetta were a bit of a shocker, at least for me. This team was hella mid during the previous stage. They weren't even able to make it out of the groups that time, and there were a lot of questions on if Hybrid as a tank would be enough, and if their team actually had the coherency to actually clutch up in a big scenario, and they proved it this stage. A lot of credit goes to this group for sticking together and for figuring things out in a new, ever so changing meta like this. Hybrid not having to play the dive tanks is doing wonders for him. It feels like he's a bit more of a stable presence on the Orisa, and it seems like the DPS were able to take care of the rest, as they were able to get some big wins, not just over Wasp XO, who can be a bit of a wild card, but against Quick Esports, who are one of the highest finishers during the Swiss stage. I like how this team was able to make it out of the group. I'm glad that my faith was able to be restored a little bit in them after what I saw the stage beforehand, and now I'm hoping for the best for them. There isn't a lot of optimism for them to do well in this tournament, but all it takes is one victory and their prize earnings can go up at the very least, so that's pretty sweet. The main story from this group is obviously ENCE though. While their efforts to make it here weren't very high because it wasn't necessary, I'm curious to see how they do in the big bracket now. They didn't do too well against SSG recently during the FACEIT Master League, and I'm curious to see how they stack up now after the meta kind of shifted a little bit and they've had a bit more time to adjust. This team is very capable of winning this tournament and clinching their spot in Sweden automatically with a first place. I like where this team is. It seems like the DPS situation isn't as bad as I once thought. Ashe is rising up in popularity, which is great for Kai. Kevster and how flexible he is can always be a nightmare. And it seems like they're doing a good enough job having to adjust with the vast number of tanks that are kind of playable right now. And as I thought, it seems that this whole Juno Brig setup isn't too bad for a support line that kind of leaves a bit to be desired in terms of the playmaking department. This team is strong enough to make it all the way through. They are the defending champs from Stage 3. I'm just curious to see if they can put pen to paper now and finish the job. In Group B, we would witness Virtus.pro and One Man Army make it through. Nothing too shocking there, just because One Man Army were pretty good this stage before, although I did predict them to come up short against Team Peps, because like I mentioned, during the Swiss stage, they actually played One Man Army and beat them down pretty badly, but it was a tale of 2 different stories here in this one, as One Man Army didn't just beat Peps once, but twice, which is pretty insane. That is a very quick turnaround after losing to them badly the week before. This team is extremely capable despite being so diverse, and it seems with all this Genji being played that Top Dragon is in his element right now. This is exactly where he wants to be. This is his ultimate comfort zone. He made some huge plays throughout the entirety of the group stage last week, and despite my concerns of them maybe not being the best outside of dive, it seemed that they handled the transition well. Everybody's still firing on all cylinders, and they genuinely seem like one of those dark horse teams that could make an upset happen against one of the higher tier teams in the tournament. I mean, just against Virtus.pro, they were able to snag a map and make that series feel competitive. They made those guys earn it, when in most cases, you would assume they would dominate through without even having to break a sweat. That is a huge sign that this team is dangerous, and they can compete with most teams in this region. I was very wrong about them, and I apologize. This team had their ups and downs, and that is something to note, but when it came down to the clutch, whenever it felt like they were down and out, they'd fight their way back tooth and nail and come out victorious. And of course, because of that VP game, they have shown us time and time again that they can rise up to their competition and play at a higher level. That makes them a threat, even to some of the better teams in this tournament. If I'm one of the top teams that has a lot of pressure on them to win, I would not want to run into these guys in like a lower bracket scenario. Things could get dicey real fast. On the flip side of it though, you have to wonder if there's room for concern for Virtus Pro because it took them as much as it did to defeat a team like One Man Army. That series damn near went the distance. It was way closer than the score may imply. And you only want to see those types of matches when you're playing ENCE, when you're playing SSG, or Piece of Cake, or Twisted Minds. Doing it against a team that's a bit lower on the spectrum could lead to some worry, and it makes me wonder if all of these meta shifts are affecting them or not. Now, because of the talent they have, I'd like to think they'll be okay, and maybe they're truly saving it for this tournament where they have to go all out, but it's something to monitor for sure. There was some kind of weakness that was shown, and there's a possibility for some of the lower teams on the spectrum to maybe take advantage of that. As for Group C, we'd see the Chads of the group make it to the next round, that being Space Station and SR Peak Check. SSG making it here, no shocker at all. They cruised on through just as you'd expect, but I felt like this team had some extra pep in their step that made them exciting after signing KSA. They immediately plugged him into the starting lineup over the weekend, and he didn't miss a beat. It's like he has been playing this entire time in the pro still, despite taking that break. Usually in the past, these types of London Spitfire teams, if you will, would suffer when Hadi wasn't in the game, or if there was a certain meta he wasn't good at, but that just wasn't the case with KSA. And that's just because of the type of player he is. He's showing us the potential that he can bring to this group. And this came despite the team not playing as much Orisa as a lot of other teams did. And that's just because they can play around the strengths of KSA's D.Va and Ramattra. He's just one of the most elite tank players in this region by far, if not the best. He's making one hell of a difference, and it feels like SSG has a different vibe to them. There's more energy, they're less limited in what they can play, and that makes them extremely dangerous. It feels to me like the stars are aligning perfectly. They found that one thing they were lackluster in with tank, they fixed that, and the meta shifting in a place that feels rather ideal. I talked about KSA, but Funny Astro seems to really love the vibes of Juno. It's great how aggressive she is, it suits his style very well. Not to mention right now, the DPS situation is lining up better than I thought it would. With the amount of Mei being played, it is right up Backbone's alley, and Sparker's right there to do the rest on Ashe. This team is in their element right now, and they're going to be very, very hard to defeat. As for SR Peak Check, they're more so just here for fun. You're not expecting anything now that they've made it out of the groups, but I'm just glad they did in general. It looked a bit dicey at first, after getting smoked by Oblivione on the first day, ruined the opportunity of seeing him versus Hadi in that Rein 1v1, but they were able to claw their way back. When it mattered the most, they clutched up, and they beat Oblivione and Hypnos. The salty runback was a success. It was an epic 5-map series, but they clutched it up, they cleaned up their play from the day before, and you absolutely love to see it. It brings a lot of life, a lot of extra character to this tournament. Having him be here, having the GOAT LH Cloudy, just go out there, chat out on the Rhine, win or lose. It is awesome that he was able to make it this far. And I'm hoping that this time, maybe there can be a bit of a better run compared to the previous stage. Optimism for this team to do anything is very, very low, but just knowing how they were able to make day 2 adjustments makes me think that perhaps they could do it in the lower bracket here as well, especially knowing that the meta is just a lot more favorable for them compared to what it was in Stage 3. They're still automatically at a disadvantage because they're playing Rein, but at least there's better support for him with some relevant heroes that everybody else is playing right now, you know? I would hope that they can at least make one of their matches entertaining before they get eliminated, but that's about as far as I'd probably go with them. But anyway, moving on to Group D, we'd see Twisted Minds and a Piece of Cake make it through. No shocker there in terms of the end result, but how we got there was the thing that is very scary, especially if you're a Twisted Minds fan. They made it here limping to the finish line practically. I mean, just on day 1, they already almost lost against a team that they should be blowing out in mental attitude. They had to take them to 5 maps to get the job done, and there were some big time struggles going on with Yubi's Mei, amongst other things, as they try and figure out their new situation with yet another support on this team in MCD. But then things get even worse. Against the team that you'd like to see them perform well against, they got the smackdown laid on them. Team A Piece of Cake went out there and probably should have 3-0'd them. If it weren't for a crazy mental lapse on Runasap, that's exactly where we would be. They were in firm control of this series, and that is not good for a Twisted Minds team that is barely on the cusp of still being relevant. This team is still barely in the hunt to make it to Sweden, and they have to clutch up. They need to get like a top 3 finish or to go above Virtus Pro if they want any kind of chance. And right now, with how they're playing, they're simply not going to get it done, and they're going to get eliminated early. They have to turn it up to a new level, and they've got to clutch up like we've seen Twisted Minds do many times in the past, like we saw with Team Saudi Arabia in 2023. If not, they're going home. Although, to give them some slack, their team is constantly changing. It seems like nothing can ever be stable with this team. They lost KSA a while ago. There was drama with that. They have to replace him. That took forever. And now their support line seems to be a revolving door. We haven't seen a consistent support line outed for this team since Stage 1. That was forever ago. This team's just falling from the inside out. And at this point, I don't know if it's sustainable anymore. I don't know if they can handle it at this point with all the pressure on the line while having to deal with all these synergy issues and the meta changes as well. Twisted Minds are in a very dangerous situation. They're still in contention to potentially make it to Sweden, but they're in grave danger, and all signs are indicating that their doom is coming very soon. On a more positive note though, how about A Piece of Cake? This team that played so poorly in Stage 3 under the Gaming Gladiators alias, who failed to even make it out of their own group, comes back strong in Group D, comes back strong in the Swiss stage, and they look like they're built to potentially compete. They're still in the thick of it to potentially make it to Sweden. They're right there. Virtus Pro are within reach. This team's been playing with a lot of decisiveness and confidence. It seems like there's less pressure on them after being dropped by Gaming Gladiators. And I feel a similar vibe to Stage 2 when they hit their peak. Feels like the meta's in a similar situation, if I remember correctly, and back then they were able to make top 3. And right now, their team is arguably better than it was back then, in large thanks to the shakeup they made at support. That was their Achilles heel for pretty much all of their poor performances throughout OWCS so far. The blunders by FD God, the revolving door at Flex Support, all of it was a mess. But they came in with a new mindset, they made the changes they needed, and now this team feels a lot more cohesive. I like where they're at. I feel like the playstyle has changed in the best way possible. There's better overall fundamentals with this team, and that can go a long way just to make sure that you're always beating the opponents that you should. And again, Virtus Pro, they're a team that's definitely within reach. With the meta shift going on, they definitely aren't invincible. And if they meet up with them, you never know what might happen. You can't count this team out just yet. Also, I apologize for saying that Naga was not on this team. I just spread misinformation on the internet with that one. Thanks Liquipedia for having a different name. It confused me. Should have clicked on it to begin with. That's my bad. But yeah, this team is better than they have been in a long time. If not, they could be hitting their peak right now, which is at the best possible moment. So I'm excited to see what these guys have got. Before getting into my bracket and predictions for this tournament, let's do a standings update to see where we currently sit with the playoff picture, or I guess you could say the qualification picture. Who is going to be top 3 in EMEA? Right now, the order is ENCE, who has a narrow first place lead over Space Station. Those two are in an excellent position to make it on into Sweden. First place in this tournament automatically goes, but if these two even place somewhat high, then their spots are all but clinched, and you already know that's going to happen. They don't have to try all that hard. I think that's the interesting thing with this tournament. They could kind of just lay off the gas once they qualify, and that could be it, and that could make the entire result of this tournament be flipped on its head. But I think knowing the egos and how much these teams want to win, that they'll go all out, and they'll probably finish amongst the top 3 for sure. And that'll be more than enough to make it into Sweden. Where things get a lot more interesting is for that number 3 spot. Technically speaking, there's a bunch of teams still in the running. Mathematically, you could even include the likes of SR Peak Check and Vendetta and One Man Army. But realistically speaking, it would take a miracle run for any of them to somehow sneak into top 3. What you're looking at in terms of the actual race is Virtus.pro, Twisted Minds, and A Piece of Cake. They're all within like 100-ish points of each other. VP are obviously the favorites at number 3 right now. They have the slight lead, and they have looked the best over the last handful of months. And while you should keep that stuff in mind, just knowing the overall talent, all that stuff isn't worth a damn in this tournament. Everything else you can throw right out the window in terms of the past. It comes down to how you play on this weekend. If either Twisted Minds or A Piece of Cake finish above them, they're eliminated, and they're not going to Sweden. They have to ensure that they finish above both of those teams if they want to maintain their spot. Mathematically, they don't hold a big enough lead for there to be any leeway, and the same applies for Twisted Minds and A Piece of Cake. They're too close within each other. It all comes down to who finishes above who. It's obvious who the favorite is going to be, but man, it's double elimination. It's just one weekend. You could easily slip up and then not make the proper adjustments, and then suddenly you're watching from home. Not to mention there's so many playstyle changes going on, roster changes, meta changes. It comes down to 1 week with all of this chaos going on, and that's what makes it so interesting, despite it feeling kind of clear on who should be coming out on top in theory. It's very exciting to see how this top 3 is going to turn out. There's been a lot of crazy upsets recently, so anything can happen. As for how I think this bracket is going to go and who my winner is, in the end, I decided to pick SSG to go back up on top after coming up short in Stage 3. If we're going off how this team has played in OWCS, they usually have a down and then a big up. They're overdue for another big up, and what better time than right now, where it feels like they have the most life they've had since like Stage 2. With KSA coming onto the team, they are versatile. They aren't stuck in their ways anymore. And I feel that MetaFit right now is absolutely perfect for them. They beat ENCE, who were their biggest challenge just like a month ago. They seem like they're at the top of their game right now, and I don't want to go against that. It's always important to go with the hot hand in this situation, and that's got to be SSG. If it was a player that wasn't KSA, I'd feel a bit more concerned about in-game adjustments and potentially having those mishaps, but this guy's just such a professional. I have a lot of belief in him. Some people are going to say I'm hardcore glazing, but I mean, let's be real. He's been like the most dominant tank in EU for years now. He's just that type of player. He brings that type of impact to the table, and when doubts come up, you could always put Hadi back in the game if necessary. It's an interesting matchup if SSG and ENCE play in the finals, because they are pretty even in terms of roster strength, and I think in terms of the composition, both of them can benefit greatly, but right now it just feels maybe a bit more in SSG's favor now that they have a guy like KSA. There's just so many things that he can utilize in this scenario, and I like that over Vestola. Not to mention, Backbone on his signature Mei is a great look. While I love Kevster's Mei, he can't be quite as effective as somebody like Backbone in my opinion, and I think it just gives them the slow but sure burn over a team like ENCE. They're competent enough to compete, but the overall advantage and high peak on some of these heroes just slightly benefits a team like Space Station a little more, so I think they're going to win it all. That KSA buff plus London Spitfire in the playoffs is going to take them to the promised land and give them that top seed from this region. Although just for a narrative standpoint, I decided to make them go through lower bracket just for the sake of making the rivalry interesting and making sure it's not all that one-sided. But then maybe on like the final day, they make those day 4 adjustments and then they get hot, play VP in that first game, then go on. But yeah, you may have also just noticed I said VP are going to be in my top 3. I want to say that an upset can happen. It seems very doable for a team like A Piece of Cake in particular, I feel like. But I think VP right now are clearly the third strongest team, and I don't want to go against them. There's a lot of capabilities for them to be successful and even punch above their weight class yet again to potentially make another grand finals. I wouldn't be that surprised. Shockwave and Sauna are absolutely cracked out of their minds, and as always, I'm a big fan of that support line. Even in this type of meta, I think they can take advantage. They usually play well with new heroes. I don't know what it is with Gala and with Kanale, but they tend to thrive in these scenarios, and I think that'll be more than good enough to get them into top 3. If they were to play either Twisted Minds or A Piece of Cake, I firmly believe they'd blow out either of them. They're just significantly better to me. Although, speaking of A Piece of Cake and a Twisted Minds matchup, I think these two have a good chance of meeting up with each other based off of how this bracket is set up, and I actually think A Piece of Cake's gonna eliminate Twisted Minds and ruin their hopes and dreams before they can even get close to the top 3. As much as it would be a tragedy to see this Twisted Minds team come up short, I think that's exactly where we're headed. Again, I don't like all of these changes. These constant roster changes are not sustainable. MCD coming into this team as late as he did is just not good, especially with the support meta being in such a weird scenario. It's not a great look for them. They've been having all these internal issues all season long, and as much as I want to see a guy like Quartz win, this is where it ends. They cannot sustain this any longer. They're a shadow of their former selves. This is not the same team, and the results should reflect upon that. The team that once was at the top of the world, that won Stage 1, and were the best team in EU for years running, it's just over. That's not the same team, and their downfall seriously needs to be studied because it is amazing how far they have gone down the ladder. Honestly, even if they're playing like a one-man army, they might even get upset in a matchup like that. They should consider themselves thankful that they're playing a more relevant team that they've already lost to if they end up meeting with them in the lower bracket quarters. In terms of all the other teams, I'm not exactly all that interested in them, sadly. It would be crazy if one of them went on a miracle run, but it seems highly unlikely at this point in time, although maybe we could get a banger between like One Man Army and SR Peak Check, for example. In the end though, that's how I think EU is gonna go. We're gonna see the same top 3 that we saw in Stage 3, and these 3 are going to represent this region as we head to DreamHack Sweden next month. I feel like that's the most realistic outcome, maybe not the most interesting one because it's to be expected, but they're overall the 3 best teams in the region, so I don't see why I'd go against that. But maybe you feel differently. Let me know how you think this tournament goes and who you think is going to DreamHack Sweden down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you're new for more Overwatch esports content every single week. Peace.